All right, now you can go.
Today we're interviewing Don Hunt, a local businessman from Crawfordsville, Indiana. Don, has Crawfordsville always been your home?
No, I was born in Indianapolis, raised there to 8 or 9 years old, and then they moved me out into the country, 8 of us children, and my dad moved us out into Hancock County, which is east of Indianapolis, and went to a small school, graduated with 10 in my graduating class.
Wow. Don, do you remember June 25th, 1950?
Yes, I do.
Where were you?
I was at home preparing. I just graduated from high school and was trying to get things organized to go to college. I went to Butler that fall. And it was a busy summer, and the war made a lot of headlines, but you know, I really wasn't paying attention to what was going on because I had my interest in going to college.
You told me you were the Marine Corps. That means you enlisted, is that correct?
Yes and no. I was drafted, and I had a deferment in there someplace also. I was drafted, and my mother was severely was ill, very ill, and they gave me a deferment for a while, which delayed my going into the service. And she passed away, and then I had to go. So I'm at the Army recruiting depot, and the sergeant comes through and says, "We need 6 volunteers to go to the Marines." And a buddy that went to a neighboring high school that I knew very well said, "Why don't we just step forward here?" And he said, "We get to go to California, and it just seems a good thing to do." And I said, "Well, I'm for it." So we were 2 of the 6 who stepped forward, and they put us on a train and sent us to boot camp at San Diego. Now, I was a little disappointed with my buddy after we got in boot camp, and I found out what we had to do. And it was certainly an interesting thing for this little town guy to be there and going through the regimen that we had to do, and it turned out to be the best experience of my life. So I'm very proud of having done that. So from the boot camp experience, they gave you a series of tests to see what you might be qualified to do. And we had a high school coach who had just come back from World War II. For some reason, when we were in about the 8th grade, and this coach coached all grades back in this little town, this little school, and he got us boys together one day and said, as you go through high school, he said, I'm going to make a suggestion that might save your life. And of course, being in the 8th grade and the age that we were, we had no idea what he was talking about. But he explained to us, and I think he had a feel for what was coming down the pike about the Korean War. And he said, as you go through high school, he said, take all the typing you can take. He said, you never know but what, when you get in the military, it's not bad to have more than one choice. And so I get to Marine boot camp. They gave me the test, and they say, what would you like to do? And I said, clerk typist, clerk typist, clerk typist. They give you 3 choices.
Right.
And it was pretty simple to me, after being in boot camp a few days, that I was learning pretty quick. So anyway, I took the typing test, passed it, apparently. And they sent me after 14 weeks at San Diego boot camp. Approximately 5% of us were sent to El Toro Marine Air Base, which was up at Santa Ana. The rest of those fellows went to Camp Pendleton. And this was in early 1952, and the war was hot. And I know those fellows who went to Camp Pendleton were shipped after just a few weeks of extensive training there right into the heat of battle. And I thought about the coach telling us that might save your life sometime to know how to type. And so they sent me and a few others up to the air base at El Toro, and that's exactly what I had. They sent me on to a base in San Francisco for further training, and it was what they called intelligence service. And really it was, what it turned out to be for me was communications. And so I served some time there in California, and then was shipped out to Korea and became a communications person in a small air base. And it was a very small air base, one in which we had helicopters, and I think it was the first use of helicopters. And
where was this air base? Was it on the east coast or the west coast of Korea?
It was in straight north of Seoul, in the middle of the country. And
Gwangju, was it?
Well, I can't really tell you the name of the little area that it was in. It was in the middle of nowhere, you know, and it was just a small base that had the helicopters and the small fixed wing planes that were used as observation planes. And the helicopters were used mainly to transport the wounded from the front lines. And we were, probably 10 miles behind the front lines with this base. And so the use of the helicopters was quite an interesting thing for most of us, because we hadn't been acquainted with them. And then the small fixed wing planes had used our pilots and our planes, but had artillery observers in the planes. And so they would fly up over and spot artillery firing for the Marines and the Army, I believe. And they had to fly at 5,000 feet, because it's the lowest they could. The North Koreans had weapons that could reach 5,000 feet, so they had to stay above 5,000 feet with it. So the whole thing was very interesting. We had the pilots in our small base were all reservists called back from World War II. These guys were not happy to be there. I mean, they had just come back from World War II, gotten married, got settled into their jobs, starting their families, and they were called back into the Korean War. These guys were not very happy to be there, but they served with distinction, and it was just interesting to see them in their daily activities of trying to do their job and keep the morale of everyone, you know, where it should have been. Because again, they were not happy to be there, and it was very obvious with these guys. One of the fellows that was in our organization, our little base, was Ed McMahon, who became a well-known person following the Korean War with Johnny Carson. It was his sidekick. I saw him every day coming into my office at the communications office there, getting information that we may have had about what was going on north of us. So it was a very interesting time.
Did you have any guerrilla activity at night around the base?
No, the only thing we had were Korean planes. They didn't have much of an air force that bothered us, but they had some small planes that they had bombs strapped to the bottom of the wings, and they were looking for our fuel supplies, wherever we had them stored, the storage tanks. They thought that they could do some damage with that. So at night, you would hear these little putt-putt planes coming over with these wings strapped to the bottom of their wings, and trying to figure out where they were going to dump them and drop them. And we were concerned that they were either accidentally or on purpose drop them on us. So it was always interesting at night, because if they blew the whistle, you knew that there was one coming, and you better be prepared.
What rank did you achieve?
Corporal. Corporal. I was due for sergeant when I got out.
You got out?
Yeah, they discharged me.
Did you fly home or come home on a Liberty ship?
I came home on a Liberty ship. There were about 5,000 of us on that plane, or on that ship. It was not a very pleasant trip coming back. It was a very pleasant trip going over. I thought, well, I could have handled this in the Navy, without a great deal of problem. I sailed the seas there pretty well. Coming back, we hit the typhoons right out of Japan, and it wasn't a very pleasant trip back. But it was very nice to get home.
I know. What was the reaction of the people at home when you returned?
A lot of people didn't even know I was gone. It just was something that happened, and people really weren't aware of what was happening, and they were busy with their lives, and we were called in, and we went, served, came home, and there was no reaction whatsoever, Certainly my family was pleased to see me come home in one piece, but the community, you get off the plane from flying home. I got discharged at Treasure Island in San Francisco, flew home, and one member of my family met me at the plane, and I don't remember that anyone else really noticed it. I was home, and it was kind of sad.
The only ones who were really glad to see me were my folks and my girlfriend, who now is my wife.
Okay.
But what did you do after you got home? I assume you went back to Butler.
Well, I was going back to Butler, but somehow I got moved to Crawfordsville. My cousin is in the funeral business here. And he said, Don, my dad is ill, and he said, would you mind coming over, since you don't have anything to do this summer? Would you come over and help me? So I came over and spent the summer with him and learned the funeral business. I went back to Indianapolis that fall and went to mortuary school.
That's interesting.
And got a degree from mortuary school, got all the licensing and everything, and married a nurse that I met when we were in and out of hospitals over there doing our study work. And we got married in Indianapolis, and the next thing you knew, we're back in Crawfordsville, raising our family, and have been here now for 45 years. Wonderful little place to live.
I agree wholeheartedly. You've had an interesting career, Don, and we want to thank you so much for coming in. You were with the 1st Marine Air Wing.
Yes. Yes, it was VM06 was the squadron number, and to tell you the exact location slips my mind. It was straight north of Seoul, and something in the neighborhood of maybe 30-35 miles north of Seoul. And we were close to the front lines, but just behind them with the helicopters and the fixed-wing aircraft, and we did our job from there.
My experience with the 1st Marine Air Wing was flying from Gangneung to Busan. Those guys used to go over the hills, just like this. It seemed like about 200 feet above the hills.
I'm sure that that's what they were doing. It was a wonderful experience. Moving back just a little bit in my career, I had something else good happen to me. When I got sent from boot camp to the El Toro Air Base, they didn't have any place to put me when I got there. And so I'm wandering around and doing a little mess duty and nothing else. They hadn't assigned me. I go over to the gym, and there's a fella in there shooting baskets. And this is about August, September of 52, I guess. And I said to that fellow, I said, do we have a base team here? He said, yes, we do. I said, what do you think the chances are of making it? He said, well, why don't you come over? He said, I was here last year, and he said, I'm going to be here this year. And come over and work out with me. And when they have call out, we'll see, how you stack up. And so it did that, and they did that. They had call out. Now, I came from this little town where there were only 10 in my class. Now, we never had to cut anyone that played sports. It was pretty obvious if you were a male at that little school, you got a uniform. So I never had to go through this cut process. So there were about 40, 45 fellows came out. And so they started cutting. And I survived all that cutting and made the team. And we flew all over the West Coast to Texas. We played basketball all winter, that first winter that I was there. And it was the most fun, best experience from that standpoint until I got to Korea. They finally sent me a note in February of the next year saying, we've got to do something with you in this war effort. And so that's when they sent me up to, I can't think of the name of the base, up at San Francisco. And I was up there for a couple of months learning this new trade of communications and the intelligence work that we had to know. And when I came back from that, and then I had a 30-day leave, and then I was in Korea.
Wow.
So it was the most wonderful experience.
You had a very interesting military career.
Yes. Certainly was glad when someone recognized that the Korean War was important. It took them, 45 years to get a plaque on the courthouse?
That's right.
Saying, we recognize the Korean War.
And we
Now,
got
that's
a
kinda sad.
memorial in Washington, D.C. Have you ever seen that?
No, I haven't been there yet.
It was a squad marching. These guys are about 8 feet tall, and there's a wall that said, "Freedom isn't free."
Yeah.
And how true that is.
I haven't been there. That is true. So, anyway, it's my experience.
Thank you for coming in, Don.
Glad
It was a pleasure to
glad to
interview
share it
you.
with you, because my son-in-law, as we sat on the sofa the other day and watched the president greet that aircraft carrier and spend the night on there, and getting those fellows home from the Iraqi war, it was a great thing that the president did. Went out and recognized those people who had risked their lives. But you know, we didn't get any of that.
I know.
We came home totally unnoticed.
And people were completely disinterested.
That's right. That's right. So things have changed, and maybe we're being recognized. I don't know.
I don't know either. Let's hope so.
That's fine. Maybe if we write a little history here, they'll know a little more about what we experienced and what the Korean War was about. And so that's good. And I appreciate you guys taking the time to do this.
It's our privilege.
We're on.
We're interviewing Michael D. Hinkle, a retired administrator and teacher from the Crawfordsville Community School Corporation, member of the library board, and what other groups are you a member of?
Well, I'm on the BZA and the City Plan Commission. I was on the school board for one term. And
Mike?
other civic activities as they arose. I can't recall what they all are off the top of my head.
Mike served in the Army during the Korean War. However, his service was in Germany, but he is still a veteran of that era. Mike, when were you drafted?
April 4th, 1957.
1957.
I recall the day very clearly because we had at that time a particularly severe ice storm. I was in Carroll County at the time, and all the electricity was off, and they took me to the Delphi courthouse to board the bus for Fort Leonard Wood, and there wasn't a light on in the country. The REMC had a total blackout because of the ice storm. Very memorable day.
So you were trained as an infantryman, is that correct?
I spent, yes, the basic training was at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri.
Was that an 8-week or a 13-week course?
8 week.
8 weeks. After Fort Leonard Wood, where did you go?
After Fort Leonard Wood, of course, I had a few days leave, and then I went home, and following that I went to Baltimore to Fort Holabird.
Signal Depot, home of the Counterintelligence Corps, correct?
That's correct.
And you were trained as an agent?
Not originally. I was just trained as kind of an ancillary personnel, typing personnel. It was only afterwards that I converted over to the agent status.
Then you played hares and hounds all over the city of Baltimore.
Well, we got around, let's put it that way. A friend of mine had a car. He had brought his car to Baltimore, and I'd borrow his car periodically, and I had a great opportunity to see all that section of Maryland and Pennsylvania, Gettysburg, Antietam, Washington, D.C.
D.C. That's a lovely area to be stationed. I spent time at Fort Holabird. Mike, after Holabird, what happened?
Well, after Holabird, I was assigned to go to Germany, and I was there for almost 2.5 years.
What outfit were you with in Germany?
The 207th CIC.
Detachment.
It was a detachment. It was connected with 7th Corps headquarters at Meiringen, which is a suburb of Stuttgart, Germany.
Was your German fluent enough that you could get along with the civilian population?
No, not really, but I did get along. I knew enough German to get around and was able to make myself knowledgeable about the German people.
What were your duties as a CIC
Oh, my.
person?
Well, CIC sounds very James Bondish, but to a large degree it isn't. We had a great deal to do with inspection on artillery units all over southern Germany. I can't remember the names of the units, but there was, at that particular time, they had the atomic cannon over there, and part of it was inspecting these artillery units to be sure that all the atomic warheads and ammunition was safeguarded and held correctly. Also, we did investigations of people that were referred to us. We did background investigations. Also, a great deal of what we called handicapped blacks, which were simulated attacks on these Corps or Army units, and we would go in and initiate one and see how long it would take them to get the word from where we instigated the alert up to the main headquarters.
You said you did background investigation. Was that of German civilians or of GIs?
Both.
Both. I assume you probably operated in civilian clothing.
Yeah, that was the nice part about that tour in Germany. We were not regimented or not given any degree. We wore Army clothes, but we didn't have any insignias on it, and we did function as civilians all the time, Department of the Army civilians. So we didn't have to do so many of the Army things, such as, rifle practice and that. Did a lot of night work, inspection of units at night and that sort of stuff.
You were probably called Mr. and no one knew your rank, so you were treated probably as a commissioned officer.
That's true. That was one of the nice things about it.
Then you spent 2.5 years. Were you always stationed in the same town?
Yeah, always stationed in Meiringen. Kelly Barracks was the name of it, Meiringen, always stationed there. But I bought a car while I was over there, and so many of the inspection units that we went to, like Munich, Nuremberg, Straubing, Regensburg, we drove to these units and did inspection. Karlsruhe, Kaiserslautern. We drove to these units, and we'd spend 2 or 3 days inspecting these artillery units.
Back then, the dollar was high in comparison with the mark. What sort of vehicle did you drive in Germany?
Oh, I had a little black Volkswagen that I bought.
Volkswagen.
Yeah, at that particular time, the exchange rate was 25 cents to the dollar.
To the
American, 1 mark equaled 25 cents.
So then you really had a bargain in a car.
Had a grand time.
That's interesting. But you never wore civvies. You always wore your Class A's.
Oh, no, I wore civilian clothes just like a businessman. Brought all my suits at the PX there. And we always functioned as civilians and dressed as civilians, except when we went out to do inspections on units that were out in the field, and then we would wear the Army fatigues. But as far as the regular Army uniform, no, we did not wear that.
And you had no insignia whatsoever on your uniform?
None at all.
What was your rank there?
E3.
E3. Okay, that would be corporal, wasn't it? Or
Specialist.
Specialist. Okay, back in my day it was either a T5 or a corporal, but then I predate you in the Army by a few years. Where were you when the Korean War started, Mike? We ought to get that in here, too.
I'm not quite sure where I was when the Korean War started. I don't know, someplace in Germany is the only thing I think.
That was June 25th, 1950.
Oh, I don't, we were still in Germany at the particular time. The only thing that I remember most graphically is, if you recall, sometime back there, Khrushchev had given the Americans the ultimatum that they would be out of Germany, out of Berlin, and he had given us 6 months to get out of Berlin, or 6 weeks, I forget what it was. Anyway, the day that the 6 weeks was up, or the deadline was up, I recall that I was stationed on the Czech-German border, right next to an atomic cannon, which was pointed east. And with the understanding that if anything happened, we were to pull the lanyard and run, which would have been a great idea. But nothing happened. Nothing happened, so.
Khrushchev was the man who took off his shoe and beat the podium in the Ewan and said, "We will bury you."
That's
I remember that distinctly.
Yeah, that's right.
Then you saw some history in the making.
Well, yes, but I didn't make it there because I was ready to go through the Fulda Gap, down through France to Spain, across at Gibraltar, and pick me up in South Africa. But nothing happened.
Were those your orders?
No, that was my escape
Your own plan.
That was my escape plan. Oh, but it didn't happen, so that was...
You didn't get into Spain in your Volkswagen?
No, I didn't get into Spain. Got into all the other countries in Germany, or in Europe. France and Luxembourg, Holland, Belgium, Norway, Sweden, Finland.
Then you spent your leaves over there.
Oh yeah, oh yes. Spent all my leave time over there. And it was, you know, I had some friends. I had a friend of mine that worked for a general over there. He was a stenographer for a general. He and I got friendly, and we did a lot of our leave time together. And when we went to Paris and England and so forth. And took the car each time, which made it nice because we could get around to wherever we wanted to go.
That was a nice military experience.
A wonderful military experience.
Did you ever have to go on maneuvers?
Oh yeah.
Sleep in a tent?
Yes, we had to do that too. We'd have to go out occasionally when they had bivouac and to go out and sleep in a tent. Most miserable thing I could ever recall in my life, because they always did it in the winter. They always waited until they had a big snowfall. Then they'd go out and they'd set up, and we'd go out with them as a separate unit, and then we'd do inspections at night to see that everything was okay. And I can't think of anything more uncomfortable than sleeping out in the field in a pup tent when the temperature is below, because you'd wake up in the morning and your bedroll would be wet because you're sleeping on the ground and cold all the time, no place to wash, and it just seemed to go on and on. So every opportunity I bypassed those, but I did have to go out on a few of them.
I presume when you were out on bivouac, what you would do is heat water in your helmet and wash your face and shave.
About once while we were out there, that's about it.
That helmet was a marvelous piece of equipment. You could boil your socks and clean them and get hot water for a shave and a sponge bath.
Well, many people that enjoy the camping aspects, I don't share that enthusiasm. I had my fill of that. When you wake up in the morning and you go to brush your teeth, and the toothpaste is frozen, that's not a good experience.
No, it isn't.
Of course, I will say too, we did a little skullduggery on the side because we'd raid the mess tent in the middle of the night and things like that. So we weren't completely blameless.
Well, you knew how to sneak in and sneak out.
That was our specialty. That was our specialty. That, and the other thing that really, I don't know if it makes any difference nowadays, we used to go in and inspect the atomic shells for the atomic cannons. Those were always traumatic experiences for me because I remember looking at those shells. They're not very big. The biggest repository that they had would have several of these shells in them, but the biggest thing would be the charge that would push the shell. The atomic shell was not a large item, but the gunpowder or the charge that pushed it would be, yes. So those were always, we'd always be cautious about that and ask them, and they'd assure us, no problem. Until you get the two critical masses together, you don't have a problem. Well, coming from Indiana, I was not a believer. Always a little bit skeptical of it.
Mike, tell me, when you got home, did they try to encourage you to stay in the reserves?
Well, yes, they did. At my time, when I was in, it basically was broken down where it was 2, 2, and 2. 2 years of active duty, 2 years of active reserve, and 2 years of inactive reserve. But what I did is I extended my time in the Army for an additional year, and that canceled out all my reserve time.
So you got out clean.
I got out clean. I got out totally.
I assume you were very happy with that decision.
Oh yes. They always give you that re-up talk just before you leave. And I really felt sorry for that military fellow that was giving that re-up talk because everybody was kind of laughing up their sleeve. It was a pleasurable experience, and I enjoyed doing it, but I don't think I'd like to do it for a steady living.
I understand that fully.
Even though I had all those privileges and opportunities. So, but it was good for the time.
How old were you at that time?
I had just gotten out of college, so what, about 22, 23, 24, something like that.
You were footloose and fancy-free
Yeah,
at that time.
unmarried, fancy-free. So,
I think those of us who were single at the time we were in service had at least one advantage. We didn't have to worry about the home front.
that's true. That's correct.
Is there anything else you'd like to add about your experiences?
Oh, there were lots of things that happened, lots of opportunities that happened. I would think in particularly, we used to patrol the border between Czechoslovakia and Germany. And the Russians would on their side too. They would patrol the border, and that was the most awesome looking thing, because there'd be a great expanse of area between our border and their border, and it would be filled with landmines, barbed wire fences, and dragon's teeth, which were supposed to inhibit tanks from coming across. And the Russians would look at us, and we would look at the Russians, and then we would, there is one universal dirty gesture that's known the world around, and they did it, and we did it. So, but it was an interesting experience all the way around.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Okay, fine. Glad to help you out.
Certificate or not.
No, we don't.
I got it brought in along. And some of these